Acts, chapter 22, verses 1 through 30. Chapter 2. Burkett notes, in the close of the foregoing chapter, we have the apostle craving leave of the chief captain to speak unto the people, who, without any just cause, had made a violent assault upon him, and attempted to take away his life. Liberty of speech being granted him, he stands upon the stairs near the gate of the castle in which he was a prisoner, makes a sign to the people to hold their peace, and when they gave audience, in the Hebrew tongue, he thus bespeaks them. Verses 1 through 5. Men, brethren, and fathers, hear ye my defense, which I make now unto you. And when they heard that he spake in the Hebrew tongue to them, they kept the more silence. And he saith, I am verily a man, which am a Jew, born in Tarsus, a city in Cilicia, yet brought up in this city, at the feet of Gamaliel, and taught according to the perfect manner of the law of the fathers, and was zealous towards God, as ye all are this day. And I persecuted this way unto the death, binding and delivering into prisons, both men and women, and also the high priest doth bear me witness, and all the estate of the elders, from whom also I received letters unto the brethren, and went to Damascus to bring them which were there bound unto Jerusalem, for them to be punished. Burkett notes, here begins the apostle's apology or defensive plea, which he makes for himself before the people at Jerusalem, who in the foregoing chapter had so injuriously treated him, in which apologetical narration we have these particulars observable. First, we observe with what leniency and mildness he bespeaks his cruel and pestilent persecutors, the people of the Jews. He accosts them with titles of respect and honor, men, brethren, and fathers, not with opprobrious invectives. He did not render evil for evil or railing for railing. He had not so learned Christ, he knew how to suffer reproach for the gospel. But to persecute his persecutors with hard names and characters of reproach was a piece of zeal which St. Paul and the holy sufferers of those times were little acquainted with. Observe, too, how the apostle insinuates himself unto his auditors, that so he might gain their attention to what was spoken. Men, brethren, and fathers, hear ye, I pray, my defense which I make unto you. There is a lawful and pious insinuation for gaining the attention of our auditors, which the ministers of Christ may and ought to make use of, as the workman that would drive his nail dips it in oil. We gain our auditors' attention by courteous and loving compilations. Men, brethren, fathers, hearken. Observe 3, the apology or plea itself, in which he sets before them 1. His extraction. I am a Jew, born in Tarsus. 2. His education. Brought up at the feet of Gamaliel. 3. His profession. He was zealous towards God. That is, he was one of the sect among the Jews which were called zealots, and was very strict and exact in the observation of the law, and bitter enemy to Christianity, and a bloody persecutor of all that own themselves the disciples of Jesus, as the high priest very well knows, says he, from whom I received a commission, that if I found any of this way, whether men or women, I should bring them bound unto Jerusalem. Note here that Damascus was 5 or 6 days' journey from Jerusalem. Yet Paul, when a persecutor, sticks not at all, but spurs on through fire and water to glut his malice and revenge on the poor members of Jesus Christ. Learn hence that persecutors were spared neither purse nor pains. They will stick and stop at nothing, though never so toilsome and hazardous, so they may satisfy their revenge upon the poor disciples of Jesus Christ. I persecuted this way unto the death, binding and delivering into prison both men and women. Verses 6 through 9. And it came to pass that as I made my journey, and was come nigh unto Damascus about noon, suddenly there shone from heaven a great light round about me. And I fell unto the ground, and heard a voice saying unto me, Saul, Saul, why persecutest thou me? And I answered, Who art thou, Lord? And he said unto me, I am Jesus of Nazareth, whom thou persecutest. And they that were with me saw indeed the light, and were afraid, but they heard not the voice of him that spake to me. Burkett notes, our apostle, having related what he was before his conversion in the foregoing verses, in these and in the following verses he declares the manner of his conversion, namely, that when he was traveling to Damascus to pursue his persecuting design, a great light shined round about him, upon which he fell to the ground, and heard these words articulately spoken to him, Saul, Saul, why persecutest thou me? Where observe that Christ takes the opposition made against his gospel and the persecution carried on against his members as done unto himself, it being against his friends, his cause, and interest. As the honor done unto the head redounds unto the members, so the wrongs and injuries offered to the members are resented by the head. Christ said not thus when upon earth unto his murderers, Why bind ye me? Why buffet ye me? Why scourge ye me, and crucify me? But now, when his members suffer, he cries out from heaven, Saul, Saul, why persecutest thou me? Lord, thou art more tender of thy body mystical than thou was of thy body natural, more sensible of thy members' sufferings than of thy own. Observe next how ready the apostle was to understand and know, and how desirous to execute and do the will of God. Who art thou, Lord, and what wilt thou have me do? We may sooner find fire without heat than a true convert without operative grace. Observe farther Christ's answer to Paul's inquiry. Who art thou, Lord? Says Paul. I am Jesus of Nazareth, whom thou persecutest, saith Christ. Where note that the condemned, though not contemptible name, Jesus of Nazareth, is owned by Christ from heaven. Mark, he said not, I am Jesus the Son of God, I am Jesus the heir of the world and Lord of all, but I am Jesus of Nazareth. He glorified in that reproach which his enemies cast upon him, Jesus of Nazareth. He owned his name from heaven to teach his members not to be ashamed of it when reproached by it here on earth. Observe lastly the witnesses of Paul's conversion. They were men that were with him, who saw the light but heard not the voice. It's very probable that he had a considerable number of officers with him to bring both men and women that professed Christianity bound to Jerusalem. These saw the light shining and heard a confused noise like thunder, but they heard not the articulate, much less the efficacious voice of Christ, which spake so convincingly to his soul. Lord, how many are there who come under the preaching of the gospel that, with Paul's companions, hear only a confused noise and an empty sound. They do not hear the efficacious voice of Christ speaking to their hearts with a strong hand, and so remain shut up under the power of unbelief. Verses 10 through 16. And I said, What shall I do, Lord? And the Lord said unto me, Arise, and go into Damascus, and there it shall be told thee of all the things which are appointed for thee to do. And when I could not see for the glory of that light, being led by the hand of them that were with me, I came into Damascus. And one, Ananias, a devout man according to the law, having a good report of all the Jews which dwelt there, came unto me, and stood, and said unto me, Brother Saul, receive thy sight. And the same hour I looked up upon him. And he said, The God of our fathers has chosen thee, that thou shouldest know his will, and see that just one, and shouldest hear the voice of his mouth. For thou shalt be his witness unto all men of what thou hast seen and heard. And now, why tarriest thou? Arise and be baptized, and wash away thy sins, calling on the name of the Lord. Burkitt notes, observe here, 1, that although Christ converted Paul himself, yet Ananias, as his minister, must instruct him. By Christ is grace infused, but by his ministers increased. Such an honor doth Christ put upon the ministers of the gospel that he makes use of their endeavors ordinarily, both for the protection and augmentation of grace in the hearts of his people. Oh, the necessity and usefulness of a good standing ministry! It's a singular favor to have the mind of God made known to us by men like unto ourselves. And behold, the honor which God puts upon his ministers in using them as conduit pipes for conveying the water of life unto us, which is not ordinarily communicated immediately from himself or immediately received by us. Observe, too, the title given by Ananias to Saul, Brother Saul. They were now brethren by faith and profession, owing the same God, united to the same Savior, animated by the same Spirit, encouraged by the same promises, partakers of the same hope, and heirs of the same glory. As the Scripture speaks for brotherhood betwixt Christ and believers, he is not ashamed to call them brethren, so it speaks of a brotherhood betwixt believers themselves. Love the brotherhood, that is, the whole fraternity and society of Christians who are cemented by the blood of Christ and united by the bond of love. Observe 3. Ananias acquaints Saul with the special favor which God intended for him. The God of our fathers has chosen thee, or taken thee by the hand, as the word signifies, that thou should knowest his will and see that just one. So he calls the blessed Jesus to convince them of their sin in putting him to death, and to be a witness unto all men of what thou hast seen and heard. The work of the ministers of the gospel is now to witness for, hereafter to witness against. Now they witness for God and his truth, and persuade sinners to believe it. Hereafter they will witness against sinners for not believing and obeying the truth of God. Lord, what a sad consideration is this, that the ministers of Christ must be brought in as witnesses against the souls of their neighbors and friends, and be forced to testify to their faces for their condemnation. Ah, Lord, with what a heart must the poor minister study when he considereth that every sermon that he preaches must be brought in for a witness against many, if not most, of his hearers. Doubtless this sad reflection makes every faithful minister of Christ study hard, pray hard, entreat hard, be earnest and instant in season and out of season, that they may not be condemners of their people's souls. Observe 4. The advice which Ananias gives to this new convert to take upon him the badge of Christianity, to wit, baptism. Arise and be baptized and wash away thy sins. Here note that sacraments are not empty, insignificant signs, but God, by his grace and blessing, renders his own ordinances effectual for these great ends for which his wisdom has appointed them. Be baptized, and wash away thy sins. As water cleaneth the body, so the blood of Christ, signified by water, washes away the guilt of the soul. Where true faith is, together with the profession of it by baptism, there is salvation promised. Mark 16:16. He that believeth and is baptized shall be saved. Verses 17 through 21. And it came to pass that when I was come again into Jerusalem, even while I prayed in the temple, I was in a trance, and saw him saying unto me, Make haste and get thee quickly out of Jerusalem, for they will not receive thy testimony concerning me. And I said, Lord, they know that I imprisoned and beat in every synagogue them that believed on thee. And when the blood of thy martyr Stephen was shed, I also was standing by, and consenting unto his death, and kept the raiment of them that slew him. And he said unto me, Depart, for I will send thee far hence unto the Gentiles. Burkitt notes, St. Paul, having thus declared to the Jews his wonderful manner of conversion, proceeds next to acquaint them how desirous he was to have preached to the Jews rather than to the Gentiles, if the will of God had seen fit. But it proved otherwise. For, as he was praying in the temple, he had a vision in which he was commanded to hasten out of the city, because his former zeal in opposing the gospel would hinder his present teaching of it from being successful. Against this, he humbly argued that his former zeal against Christianity might, he hoped, be an argument to persuade the Jews, his countrymen, to embrace Christianity. But this argument did not prevail for his staying at Jerusalem, but he was commanded to depart from thence, to preach the gospel to the despised Gentiles, who had not such strong expectations against him, but would, with more readiness, embrace his doctrine. Learn hence, 1. That carnal reasonings are very apt to arise in the hearts of God's own servants, and cause them to object something against their obedience to the divine commands. Here the apostle objects that according to his reason he saw greater probability of doing good by his ministry among the Jews than he could hope for among the Gentiles, who would be afraid of him, as Ananias was. But Christ repeats his command, Depart and get thee hence, for I will send thee to the Gentiles. And now the apostle doth no longer dispute, but dispatch. This teaches us, too, to lay all our carnal reasonings and vain pretenses when once the call and command of God is clear, and no longer cavil, but comply. No longer object, but instantly obey. We may safely follow God blindfold when once we have assurance that he goes before us, and obey every command without hesitation or limitation. Verses 22 through 30. And they gave him audience unto this word, and then lifted up their voices and said, Away with such a fellow from the earth, for it is not fit that he should live. And as they cried out, and cast off their clothes, and threw dust into the air, the chief captain commanded him to be brought into the castle, and bade that he should be examined by scourging. that he might know wherefore they cried so against him. And as they bound him with tongs, Paul said unto the centurion that stood by, Is it lawful for you to scourge a man that's a Roman, and uncondemned? When the centurion heard that, he went and told the chief captain, saying, Take heed of what thou doest, for this man is a Roman. Then the chief captain came and said unto him, Tell me, art thou a Roman? He said, Yea. And the chief captain answered, With a great sum I obtained this freedom. And Paul said, But I was born free. Then straightway they departed from him, which should have examined him. And the chief captain was also afraid, after he knew that he was a Roman, and because he had bound him. On the morrow, because he would have known the certainty wherefore he was accused of the Jews, he loosed him from his bands, and commanded the chief priests and all their council to appear, and brought Paul down, and set him before them. Burkitt notes, observe here, 1. With what patience the Jews heard the apostle's discourse until he had made mention of the Gentiles, and that he was appointed to preach to them. Upon which they broke forth into fury and passion, and expressed their fury by throwing dust into the air and casting off their clothes, as if they would presently stone him, whom they looked upon as the worst of villains and unworthy to live. Where we may remark at once both what a vile opinion the Jews had of the Gentiles, whom they called and accounted dogs, and what a high esteem they had of themselves, and a proud conceit of their own deservings, as if the favors of heaven belonged to none but themselves, who yet trampled upon them when they were tendered to them. Observe, too, what a vile esteem these wicked Jews had of the holy and innocent apostle, who desired above all things to preach the glad tidings of the gospel to them, and longed most affectionately for the conversion and salvation of them. They account him the greatest villain upon earth, and unworthy to live upon it. But the good man had learned, and let all the faithful ministers of Christ learn it after him, to take pleasure in the reproaches and persecutions, in necessities and distresses, for Christ's sake. Away with such a fellow from the earth. It is not meet that he should live. Observe 3. The pious prudence and innocent policy which the apostle uses for his own preservation. When they were about to bind him to a post in order to the scourging of him, the apostle declares himself a free citizen of Rome, by being born in one of the cities which the Roman emperor had made free. Accordingly, St. Paul pleads for himself the privilege of a Roman citizen, who neither ought to be bound or beaten. Though we may not render evil for evil, we may yet right ourselves of all lawful means. Christ allows as much for the serpent as the dove and his servants, provided the subtlety of the one doth not destroy the simplicity of the other. The head of the serpent and the heart of the dove do best together. For as policy without piety is too subtle to be good, so piety without policy is too simple to be safe. Observe 4, how the chief captain, fearing he had done more than he could answer, because it was death for anyone in authority to violate the Roman privileges. Therefore, more out of fear than love, or more out of love to himself than to the apostle, he looses St. Paul's bonds. Whence note that when at any time the persecutors of the saints do desist from their bloody purposes, it's not out of love to them, but love to themselves. Observe lastly, the saints' deliverance from affliction and persecution, whilst on this side of heaven, are not total or final, but momentary and partial. The apostle was delivered from his chains, not from his confinement, though unbound, not set at liberty. Next day we find him before the great council, or Sanhedrim, and fresh bonds and afflictions abide him. Little rest is to be expected by the members, and less rest by the faithful ministers of Jesus Christ in this world. Blessed be God for the believing hopes of an eternal rest, where the fury of the persecutors, the injuries of the oppressors, shall cease forever, where no sin shall affect us, no sorrow afflict us, no danger affright us, but we shall be perfectly like unto God, as well in purity as immortality. In the meantime, may we, the ministers of God, who are set for the defense of the gospel, hear the burden and heat of the day with patience and courage, resolution and constancy. May we gird up the loins of our minds, not accounting either our labor or our lives dear unto us, so that we finish our course with joy and fulfill the ministry which we have received of the Lord, glorifying in our reproaches for well-doing. Yea, though we be accounted the filth of the world and the offscouring of all things, for when the chief shepherd shall appear, we shall receive a crown of glory which fadeth not away.